Hi, I'm Christopher Long, President of the Center for Public Policy Innovation. I'm joined today by Jerry Buckwalter from the American Society of Civil Engineers and our CPPI Board of Directors. And we're here today to discuss the future of transportation. Hi, Jerry. Thanks for joining me.
Chris, it's good to be with you today.
Great. Jerry, you've had a diverse and exciting career helping to develop and roll out cutting-edge technologies, products, and you're currently an executive with the American Society of Civil Engineers, where you're spearheading a multi-year, multi-million-dollar study looking into the future of infrastructure and the built world. And that dovetails very nicely with our conversation today, the future of transportation. So I was hoping to start off that you could tell us a little bit about the project and why it's important.
Sure. Well, just to start with, there are a large number of and variety of global changes coming our way. You know, we've experienced lots of change in the past, but it's rare to see the many vectors of change that are impacting us in a relatively short time period. Everything from technology, such as automation, autonomy, and the Internet of Things, to alternate energy, climate change, demographic changes, smart infrastructure, all of these things, all of which will impact our built environment. So at the American Society of Civil Engineers, we launched this bold project called Future World Vision to look at this future phenomena. That's how an engineer can provocate about how useful today's designs are for future problems. And more importantly, what are the things that we do now that, in fact, are not good solutions 50 years from now? That allows us to take the right steps toward life cycle resilience with both the present and the future properly considered. And we wanted to look far enough into the future to ensure we didn't just extrapolate a view of the future that was incrementally different or not much different than the present. The research is completed, and we are creating a computer model by which we visualize all the results. While much of the future built environment will not be apparent for many years, the first steps should be taken now to prepare for it. If we wait for the nature of our future infrastructure to become obvious, we will be too late to optimize society's use of it and the risks to build it. So in addition to all of that, the Future World Vision Project creates an immersive environment with evocative visuals, characters, and narratives. We want everyone to really imagine communities of the world 50 years in the future, all designed to be radically different and provocative. We're creating virtual worlds from a very macro citywide view right down to a neighborhood view, so the users can really begin to understand how they will live. And engineers can explore, collaborate, and consider how they can make the future a better place to live.
Wow, that sounds really exciting, Jerry. I can't wait to learn more about that. You know, as we think about the future of transportation, what's the one thing that jumps to your mind that will require us to be innovative in the policy world?
Well, the reality is there's no one thing. I'd rather we think about a variety of phenomena. We shouldn't get too absorbed with just one element of transportation because all the elements are typically very interconnected. And the transportation phenomena and the changes that are coming all have cascading impact on each other.
Okay, what are some of those phenomena and which ones will impact us soonest?
Well, the changes happening now in the nearest future are in alternatively powered vehicles. And so here's some of the things we should think about or questions we need to ask. Battery charging stations are beginning to roll out now to accommodate electric vehicles. Right now, most are not actually charged efficiently from the owner's residence, so are being charged at public parking areas or at employment location. Who's going to pay for that in the long term when urban surface transportation is dominated by electric vehicles? The employers, the local government? Is that an unconscious and automatic fiscal improvement for car owners? Another question: what is the extra greenhouse gas emissions from the power generation sources in each state for the extra electricity demand caused by electric cars? Is it on a path to be renewable at that increased scale? Or are we actually worsening the damage from fossil fuel power generation? What do we do for car heat in colder climates? I know it sounds trivial, but it's an important issue. There's no engine heat that naturally produces it. Will that be an additional drain on electrical usage? There are recently solar cells developed that could be actually embedded in car seats, generating heat there. But will that be enough? Here's a big one: lithium ion batteries. They are needed in massive quantities and are expensive and a really big environmental problem, and will cause even more problems with environmental damage from mining operations, pretty bad mining working conditions, and environmental damage from disposal. Something that's been billed as an environmentally clean choice, the electric car, has some very horrible environmental issues associated with it that we must solve. There's disruption. The auto repair industry will have to undergo vast adaptations. How are we going to help with job transfer, job retraining, and so forth, so that we don't cause a labor workforce issue, which quickly can become an economic issue? Finally, as someone who looks at the options in our future environment, I've been looking at alternatively powered vehicles for a long time. And theoretically, fuel cell power is superior to electric. It's superior in greenhouse gas emissions, in carbon footprint, and in cost. But up to now has not had the same level of research and development investment in our country or really around the world. Do we allow investment to mature before we allow what I call a dominant design to be established based on electric cars? Because once that's set, it's too hard to change. The transportation ecosystem for fuel cell cars is very different than electric cars. You can't revamp the entire nation's electric grid and the nationwide highway system with battery charging stations only to find out we need something entirely different to deliver green hydrogen for fuel cells. So there's a lot of huge questions if we're going to be stewards of this change in transportation that we need to think about.
Clearly. Thank you. That's a healthy list of questions, Jerry, about the automobile and how we're going to power them. Is there anything else that will impact us soon? And if so, what is that?
Well, there's another change coming, and it's coming faster than most people realize. Autonomous vehicles will cause some massive rethinking in the not too distant future. They're on the road now. The first countries preparing for widespread use are probably France and Switzerland and China. They could be ready within a year or two. Several areas of improvement associated with autonomous vehicles will occur, with much more benefit than the cool factor or the convenience that's driving the phenomena right now. Mapping and obstacle detection sensors will continue to improve. So the unbelievably great low accident rate of autonomous vehicles will continue. But other sensors will also start to be incorporated in these vehicles to detect icy or wet road conditions and determine safe driving conditions of all sorts on the fly for the occupant of the vehicle. Therefore, hospitals and emergency services are expected to shift drastically with far fewer auto accidents. But the legal industry will undergo a huge loss of labor. There will be very little car accident claims to pursue. And for those fewer accidents, the insurance industry will need to figure out who bears the liability. Is no longer the driver, since all vehicle occupants are now passengers. The liability falls on the product manufacturer, or the company that services the car, or the makers of the digital ecosystem, which feeds all the information into the car. But the embedded sensors and control mechanisms that I talk about go beyond that as well. So there's no more speeding, aggressive driving, or running of red lights. That's great, but that means there's lost government revenue from law enforcement and ticketing. Blockchain technologies will allow autonomous vehicles to track their own behavior accurately and safely, regards to refueling, maintenance, payment for services, and all of those things. So the economics of vehicle ownership will continue to improve. But as a result, there will be no market for used cars if they're non-autonomous vehicles. It will vanish. Here's another one. Autonomous vehicles don't need to park because they can drop you off and autonomously transport someone else in your family. Therefore, parking spaces and parking lots will virtually disappear, but drop-off points will be necessary. But that has a cascading impact. How do municipalities replace the parking revenue? And how do we avoid what experts call the phantom ride phenomena? Empty seats, but the streets are still full because cars are now going back to pick someone else up after dropping someone else off. You can probably tell I'm actually a big fan of the potential quality of life improvement possible with autonomy. But there's a downside that the car makers have not properly addressed yet: cybersecurity. What happens when someone hacks into the automobile system, which now controls the car's movement? Cybersecurity has not kept pace with the autonomous developments. Most future transportation studies predict that the world will see the first, they call it level 4 autonomous vehicles, which are fully integrated autonomous vehicles with the road infrastructure, and that will hit the world by 2038 to 2040. That's not that much time for us to figure this out.
Okay, so what are the long-term phenomenon that you think will cause transportation changes?
Okay, great question. I've talked about the stuff that's coming sooner, but there's some longer-term things that are less certain, but are definitely there. I'm going to talk about two of them: air vehicles and cargo movement. Air vehicles. Last year, actually it's 2 years ago now, since we're in 2022, Uber began trials of flying taxis in both Dallas and Dubai. They hope to be transporting passengers in flying taxis within 2 years. Google has already designed the takeoff, landing, and recharging concepts for autonomous air taxis for Los Angeles Airport. If this progress continues, we have to think about, when does autonomous air travel overtake autonomous surface travel? And what are the regulations required to allow autonomous air travel at low altitude in urban settings? Switzerland is at the forefront. They are already the first country, and they have already established those national regulations. And how much do flying cars relieve surface congestion, leading us to design lower volume streets instead of higher volume streets? A second topic, cargo. Lots of improvements are anticipated here. The first autonomous vehicle package delivery service in restricted locations is on track to be fully functional by the end of next year. It's projected that in 40 years, cargo will be traveling through hyperloops underground or other very different mechanisms. Well before that, cargo will be moved in smart containers that track their contents and their destinations. And ports are projected to be automated and running more autonomously and on renewable energy. But here's the big disruptor. If 3D printing, additive manufacturing, if you will, becomes a dominant feature worldwide in about 50 years, land and water traffic will be reduced dramatically. It's projected that surface traffic will be reduced by 50% and maritime traffic will be reduced by over 80%. That means we might be building highways and ports, by the way, which typically have an expected life greater than 100 years with taxpayer money for a volume of cargo transport that is no longer needed within 50 years. I don't find any policymakers wrestling with that issue yet, and maybe they can't because of the natural cycle of their term of office, but that is a big disruption.
This is a lot to process, Jerry. How do we put all this together? You said at the beginning that these changes all impact each other and the different transportation systems are interconnected. So how do we best think through all these issues?
Well, I think we do this best by thinking about the whole ecosystem, the entire vehicle, transit, road, and highway systems as a whole. And I think if we do that, we will think through these gnarly questions that I've posed much better. But I also think we will discover some great things that are happening already. For example, in the very near term, I know there's already some cities where energy conserving city lights will actually respond to and follow movement of people in cars by brightening, dimming, or turning off. Sections of Route 66 have been designated for testing of solar sidewalks to produce clean energy, but also power LEDs that light the road at night. Traffic light timing will emerge totally differently based on queuing algorithms as opposed to timing algorithms, and all our wait times will go down. Pedestrian crossing sensor communication will be delivered right into the closest vehicles. There will be an alert in your car letting you know there's a person in the crosswalk. On-demand pricing, we usually call it congestion pricing, will become much more commonplace. By 2030, connected streetlights will be in wide usage and will stream data between millions of devices to all city departments. So there's a chance that the transportation lighting ecosystem, if you will actually provide data that improves traffic, air quality, public safety, parking, you name it, anything imaginable. Lastly, in the near term, high-speed rail, or any variant of that, has incredible potential. Unfortunately, it's still pretty much stalled in the US. The rest of the first world has embraced high-speed rail, but the US is still stuck in our cars. But enough of the list for the near term. Let me talk about some long term where we really get to shape this. Public transit and shared transport can make a comeback. It should be widely used in urban setting. For instance, pre-routed mass transit, buses, subways, vans can become more dominant. It's almost like the newer elevators where you select your floor before entering the elevator, and an algorithm directs you to the elevator so that you're paired with others who are going to the same floor. All of transit can start to happen that way. Public transit can also become segmented or compartmentalized so that you have a degree of personalization. Picture a range of compartments, let's say designed to be, in our terms, coach or first class, but tailored to your personal preferences. And those compartments make transit more resilient. And by the way, no longer negatively impacted by pandemics. You have some natural social segregation with that. Pedestrian movement, micro-mobility kind of things will be enhanced and become more prevalent. I hate to say it, we're just finally going to start walking more, which, by the way, is going to make us also healthier. Some things, it's like a return to the past. But I want to talk about two other things, and these are more futuristic. Urban mobility will be redesigned to accommodate what we call megacities, higher verticality and greater density in the cities of the world. People will start to travel more within giant buildings because they contain the entire ecosystem of functions a person needs, and between buildings via air portals using air taxis, and actually won't go down to the ground level like we do now. Another futuristic concept, offline stations for mass transit. What do I mean by that? Picture a train. It stops at the station and there's no other trains that can go by it. It's on a track. If you take the stations offline for trains, subways, even road vehicle convoys with smaller, medium-sized cars, you can actually get the whole system moving with more flexibility relative to local versus distance. The entire system speeds up. So there's some great things coming that are not that hard to implement and create huge benefit, and they don't have to be that high tech.
Well, after all this, Jerry, what's the one takeaway you would want people to remember that we can work on right now, right away?
To me, that one's easy. As I've looked at all this phenomena, there's one element that keeps popping up, and that is, I'll use the word on-demand transport. And attractive public transit system is the ideal, but we can have ride sharing and on-demand vehicle services of some sort. We've already seen that start to emerge. Those are the very best solutions for urban settings. It won't work as well as the setting becomes more rural, but since most of the world lives in urban areas, and that urbanization will get even more dramatic in the future, then on-demand transportation is a durable improvement. But for the US, this is a massive cultural adjustment. No more car ownership. And we are a car culture. But I would encourage people to think about how on-demand transportation as a service is the key to almost all of this phenomena.
Jerry, it's been a fascinating and informative discussion today. Thank you for joining me to share your thoughts on the future of transportation.
It's been my pleasure, Chris, and I hope others like me view all of this with excitement, not with fear. I think there's some great things coming. Thank you for having me.